Hello, and welcome to this ethical dilemma in science, where we're going to take a look at the CITES ban of ivory sales and ask the question, are we protecting endangered species and, or possibly, are we limiting sustainable conservation? So again, to start out with, this is an article that I came across earlier, I guess earlier this month, from the Herald from Zimbabwe. Basically looking at the title here, CITES must allow a sustainable use of wildlife. And so what is the story behind this? And so there was an African elephant conference held in Hwang, Zimbabwe in May 2022 in preparation for a meeting of CITES coming up in Panama in November 2022. And now within this meeting, the African Elephant Conference, six of the range states, so six of the states where the elephants, kind of migrate to and from, met. Many others did not attend, but the ones that did attend were Zimbabwe, Zambia, Tanzania, Namibia, Botswana, and later this was ratified by South Africa. They urged CITES to respect the sovereign rights of nations. With the goal within their statement, this Hwang Declaration, to resolve to develop a functional community based on natural resource management policies and legislation that allow communities to receive benefits that outweigh the cost of management. And I added the emphasis within this statement here. If we take a look at this, take a little bit further, for example, Zimbabwe has roughly 136 tons of ivory that's been stockpiled worth about $600 million. But at this point, they're just storing it. They don't have the ability to use that as a resource to potentially pay for their conservation efforts. And in reality, they're actually paying money to protect and kind of maintain this ivory store. So they're spending money instead of getting the benefit of this. So within the Hawaiian Declaration, they're calling for a commitment to the principle of sustainable use, to generate revenue through the sale of wildlife products by developing a viable instrument which will enable our countries to sell ivory stockpiles to raise funds for conservation. So basically asking for the opportunity to get some benefits out of the natural resource, in this case endangered species, that are present within their area. Now, what that makes this potentially controversial is that there are many other nations within the range of African elephants. We can see this illustrated here. So the green states here, as of, and I think this is in 2019, they were against the ivory sales, what it referred to here is the domestic ivory market. And it's only these states down here at the bottom in red that have expressed support and interest in opening up the sale. Now, in terms of full disclosure, the elephant populations in the southern region of the African continent are going up. They're being maintained and kind of preserved and growing within this region, where many other the range states where these elephants are going to migrate to, the populations are declining. So overall in Africa, the population has declined, but it's growing in these kind of red states down here, illustrated here within Africa. Now, the majority of these states, these countries, are against the opening up of these ivory sales. And so the question becomes, we look at elephants as a migratory species. And so at some level, should they be recognized as a shared resource across all of these African nations? And if you do so, how do you coordinate the conservation efforts within this region? So, to take a step back and look at the kind of background or what's going on with endangered species, with the sale of ivory. And it basically gets down to this idea that there's this illegal wildlife trade that is a multi-billion-dollar business each year. And so, smuggling of both live animals to, collectors or as pets, as well as animal products, like ivory from elephant tusks, various tiger parts that are used in some forms of medicinal remedies, folklore type remedies associated with that. And so there is this kind of interest in getting access to these endangered species. So just a couple examples of this from the recent news, two from 2022, one from 2017. Shark fins, in this case drying in a region here. Great market for this. Shark fin soup is a delicacy, but they basically kind of catch the sharks, chop off their fins, and then dispose of the bodies, and then just use a small portion of them. Ivory sales, lots has been said and heard about ivory, but you've got these tusks from rhino horns and elephant tusks, where basically they're used as a resource for carving and other needs like that. And then finally over here, the Asian tiger market. Again, many interests in both tiger meat as a delicacy, as well as tiger body parts for various medicinal remedies. Now, this isn't just a global issue. We can see this within the United States with both the immigration or the importation of endangered species. So again, just some recent articles within the last 6 months to a year. We had a person in California smuggling in reptiles, another company, and this was in New Jersey, smuggling in eels, birds coming in. In many cases, as pets for collector, eels were brought in as a delicacy for sushi. And so we've got a problem with that coming into the United States. But we also have examples of American endangered species that are being exported out to the world. And so there's an example here, a 2021 article where they were poaching succulent plants. And so plants that are relatively endangered that are being exported illegally, again, to collectors around the world. And so there is this massive industry, a black market industry associated with the kind of smuggling and illegal import and export of endangered species, both plants and animals, both living as well as specimens or at least body parts. And so what's happened is that we had a creation of CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of wild fauna and flora. So fauna are living animals and flora are going to be plants. And so we've got this huge illegal trade that's going on as, distribution of wild animals and wild plants for food, for pets, ornamental plants to have it in your garden or maybe a little herbarium that you're growing, tourist curios, as well as medicines. And so this international agreement was started out in 1963, finally agreed upon in 1973 and implemented in 1975, where CITES, this Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species, is managed and administered through the United Nations. But the intent is to kind of limit and control this international trade, which would be threatening endangered species. And so, promote the survival of threatened, vulnerable, and endangered species. And so this limits the movement of animals and plants that are protected under CITES between nations. And so at this point, the parties to CITES are 183 out of the 195 countries within the world, as well as the European Union. And so what we can see over here on the right-hand portion of the slide are the approved recorded transactions that have occurred under the CITES agreement. And so what we can see is that trade is kind of limited, trade is restricted, and so you need to have permission for the movement of these materials. You need to have kind of an appropriate use for this, that's scientific use or something related to that. And so if we take a look at what's covered within CITES, what is actually occurring is that CITES has three lists referred to as appendices, which correspond to three different levels of protection for the species. And so Appendix 1 over here in the blue, including things like the Sumatran tiger, are organisms that need the greatest level of protection. And so international trade of these only occurs under exceptional circumstances because there are restrictions, because these species are threatened with extinction. And that's about 3% of the species that are listed within CITES. The vast majority of the organisms living, both plants and animals, covered under CITES are listed in Appendix 2. Appendix 2 is kind of a mid-level of control where trade is going to be strictly controlled. And this will often be species that are not really close to extinction right now, but they may become endangered if trade is not regulated to prevent overexploitation. And so Appendix 2 corresponds to about 97% of the species. So a good example of this would be like orchids. Kind of rare orchids are protected under CITES Appendix 2 because they would be threatened if they were overexploited, if people were to kind of harvest them and transport them for orchid growers and orchid collectors. And then finally, over here, Appendix 3 is kind of the lowest level of protection underneath CITES. And this is basically regions or countries, participants to the CITES agreement that are asking for assistance because they've got internal regulations for the protection of the species, but they need cooperation of other countries in order to prevent the unsustainable and illegal exploitation of the species associated with this. And so if we take a look at different examples of the use of CITES in these types of agreements, we've got African lions. African lions are listed under CITES Appendix 2, and so they're not necessarily endangered right now, but there's a risk that if they're overexploited, they could be endangered very, very quickly. And so they're jointly covered by CITES, the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species, as well as the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species. And that's the CMS we see in this joint statement over here. And so this is an agreement that came out relatively recently, looking at this in 2016, where all of the range states, again, African lions, like the elephants, are going to be migratory. And so all of the nations where these African lions migrate to basically have come together and reached an agreement on these kind of shared goals for lion conservation. And some of those goals include involvement of the local communities in conservation activities, as well as sharing the benefits of those conservations, mitigating human-lion conflicts. In many cases, lions are predators, and so lions will go through and potentially, attack herds of cattle or herds of organisms that are being grown within that region, or potentially, being dangerous to human beings. So mitigating that, and so lions and humans are kept a little bit separate. Improving protected area management, as well as restoring connectivity of fragmented populations. These populations that may be a little bit isolated by the growing development of these nations, making it difficult for them to migrate from one region to another. Like the elephants, we can see that the lions in some areas are growing, but in many of the other range states, the number of lions are still in decline. So that overall, the subpopulations overall Africa are still on the decline in a period of time from about 1993 to about 2014. Now, if we take a look at this, some of the nations, we said, are seeing a growth in the population of the lions. And so this is a 2022 argument from the Zambian perspective. This is actually a commentary by their Minister of, look at this, get it correctly, the Minister of the Green Economy and Environment, and basically saying that we need to have an agreement, and within the 2016 agreement, highlighting the benefits of trophy hunting. And this is, we need hunters pay to go in and hunt and kill an organism, in this case a lions, but allowing for trophy hunting to occur where it's based upon scientifically established quotas, taking into account the social position, age, and sex of the animals, which has the potential to contribute to the conservation of lion population. Now, the Zambian perspective, this minister here is basically saying that if we have a good trophy hunting program, it can be managed as a conservation tool that is involved with culling the I guess, it's not a herd of lions, tribe of lions, I guess. Can't remember the term of a group of lions, apologize for that. And so basically go in and kind of manage the potential overpopulation by removing individuals in these trophy hunts. And so you prevent the overpopulation as well as generating some income that could be reinvested in the conservation effort. Now, if we take a look at this, there have been a lot of interest in both trophy hunting and banning of trophy hunting, of the hunting of these endangered species. And so again, just two relatively recent articles, and I'll put the links to those down below in the notes section. But trophy hunting will not save African lions. The UK ban on imports is a positive step for wildlife conservation. This was written by a scientist involved with lion conservation. And the flip side of this is this commentary over here, colonial racism on full display in UK Parliament's proposed trophy import ban. This idea that the United Nations is limiting the potential for some of these nations to generate funds associated with trophy hunting. Now, it's unclear whether or not there's a good balance between opening up and limiting trophy hunting. But the first example of this occurred in 1973, where Dr. Richard Leakey helped end legal elephant hunts in Kenya. But what happened over a period of time after that is that without the funds from the elephant hunters, there was not enough money for the anti-poaching efforts, and the elephant population plummeted. And so it's a difficult, kind of a difficult decision to make. What should be allowed and what should be limited. Now, if we take a look at this within the United States, within the last couple months, in a court case, has been required to allow some trophy hunters to import their elephant trophies from the countries, African countries, which allowed that to occur, so those southern countries. And so it's the Fish and Wildlife Service that goes through and approves these permits for importation of this. And their kind of rationale, at least at this point, is that trophy hunting can be approved for the import of trophies, body parts in essence, if the species enforcement, the program that's involved, is well regulated as part of a sound management system. And so we're taking a look at the possibility that this hunting would have a positive enhancement of the species in some way for the protection of the species. And that's generally through the generation of funds that could be used to support sustainable conservation efforts. Now, hunters at this point in Zimbabwe may be paying anywhere from about $65,000 to $140,000 to hunt lions. At this point, elephant hunts are a little bit less than that, about $36,000 to $70,000. Ultimately, it would probably be higher if not for the difficulty in bringing in these trophies into the United States. And so if we take a look at this, again, within the perspective of the elephants and this ivory trade, so right now, elephant ivory is included under CITES as a basically complete prohibition. And so African elephants, except for those in the areas that we see the growth in the population, are all listed in CITES Appendix 1. So international trade is prohibited. So that's the majority of the African elephants, all of the Asian elephants, but it also includes all of the elephant ivory, including that is coming from these populations of elephants that are growing in areas of the southern regions of the African continent, including the countries of Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. And so if we take a look at this, then this idea is these countries down here in red, the countries that are advocating for kind of trade of their ivory stores, are pushing for it. They've pushed for it in past years. It's been blocked in past years. But the goal is that cash-strapped economies like Zimbabwe are asking to be able to sell their ivory stocks in order to be able to generate funds to cover conservation efforts. Many of these nations, even the ones that are seeing kind of growth of the populations of elephants and lions, would get funds from tourism. But with the pandemic, tourism has really dropped off. And so because of that, they've got massive shortages in their ability to pay for staff and equipment and funds for the communities and protectors of the wildlife. And so they run the risk of not being able to kind of sustain the growth in these elephant populations just because they can't continue to protect them. And so their intent is to be able to sell their ivory to generate funds. Now, this has happened in the past. In 2007, CITES made an agreement that approved a one-time ivory sale with the goal of basically flooding the market with legal ivory, ivory that's sold with the proper export permits and import permits and all of that stuff, with the idea that it would, kind of put the black market smugglers and poachers out of business. Sadly, though, in a study done, I think this was done by scientists at Princeton and I think USC in 2016, taking a look at whether kind of the long-term effects, the 10-year effects of this ivory sale, this one-time ivory sale. And what they saw was that there was an increase, about a 66% increase in illegal ivory production and smuggling, an increase in poaching that occurred with that ivory sale. And so that effort, a good effort, basically an experiment to see what would happen if they were to release ivory onto the market, may or may not generated some funds, but it also contributed to an increase in poaching as well. So if we take a look at this, these countries that we're taking a look at, Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, taking a look at the gross domestic product per capita, they have, anywhere from about $1,000 to, maybe $7,000 of income, of the equivalent of the gross domestic product, the monetary value of goods and services produced in the country. And this is an indicator of economic activity and a kind of an indicator of standard of living. And so we can see is that these countries then have a lower standard of lower standard of living, and so they're poorer countries if we want to think about it that way. In contrast, the United Kingdom, the GDP per capita is about 40,000. The United States is about 63,000. So we have a much higher kind of standard of living, much higher economic activity. And potentially we are, kind of dictating what's going to be going on in these countries with limited income and limited resources available. So that gives rise to the ethical dilemma in science for this week, asking the question, is conservation of endangered species a local, a regional, or a global issue? What is sustainable stewardship of endangered species? What does it look like, and who should be involved? What should be the role of those highly developed urbanized countries like the United States, like the United Kingdom, in promoting sustainable development and conservation of endangered natural resources, such as endangered species, in countries like Botswana and Namibia, where they have limited resources beyond the natural resources of the lions and the elephants and other potentially protected species. And then finally, how do we ensure an equitable distribution of the benefits of species conservation with the burden of protecting and sustaining natural environments and endangered species? It's nice, sitting here in the United States, we can watch the Discovery Channel or Natural Geographic, get kind of exposed to, the African plains and the organisms that are there. Very few of us will probably have the funds available to go on, a safari and actually see them in the wild. But, we have that benefit. But the individuals, the residents of that region, the indigenous people, are in a position where they have limited resources available, and it's being kind of held to them to kind of protect these endangered species. Where us, in the United States, we had lots of endangered species, and we urbanized and developed and didn't do such a good job. And now we're calling on others to do what we were unable to do kind of historically. So basically, what does sustainable conservation look like in a region where these natural resources, these natural endangered species, are pretty much the majority of their economic potential? So thank you for listening to this week's Ethical Dilemma in Science. Please see the description below for further information and references. Thank you, and have a great week.